Live, where news comes first. This is ABC-7 Extra.
Welcome to ABC-7 Extra. Good evening. I'm Maria Garcia. Glad you're with us tonight. We're exploring what the deal between University Medical Center and the Children's Hospital could mean for taxpayers. Remember, to pull Children's out of bankruptcy, UMC will make Children's a subsidiary. According to the deal they reached, Children's has to pay $15 million to UMC. Remember, UMC said Children's owed it $106 million. There's another $33 million UMC is asking for, but that's unsecured debt, which means Children's absolutely has to pay back $15 million first, although there's no set timeline or deadline for that just yet. And after that's paid, UMC would like Children's to pay back that unsecured $33 million when it's profitable and can afford to. The deal pretty much forgives $58 million with no guarantee if or when UMC will ever see the other $48 million. This plan all depends on the approval of bankruptcy judge Christopher Mott, and already there's an objection to the plan from the state. The Attorney General is representing the Texas Department of Health and Human Services. The state is investigating whether Children's improperly received Medicaid funding. Children's got that money based on rent expenses, but in reality, the rent was not paid. Children's denies wrongdoing, but if the state finds that it did receive money it was not entitled to, it would be up to UMC to pay back that money. That could be anywhere from $12 to $36 million plus fines. We're going to talk about all of that and more with County Judge Veronica Escobar and UMC Board Chair Steve Degroat. We asked Children's Administration or physicians to be here, but they declined. You can email us your comments and questions now to ABC7Extra at KVIA.com. You can also reach us by phone at 496-1775. On Twitter, you can tweet me at MariaGABC7. Make sure you use the hashtag ABC7Extra. That'd be helpful. Before our discussion, let's take a closer look at the objection from the state.
The goal at that confirmation hearing is to have no one object to the plan. Because if there's an objection, then it delays the exit of bankruptcy, it delays the execution of the plan.
That's why the Health and Human Services Commission, or HHSC, is objecting now.
They said, if you want it confirmed and if you want to avoid us objecting to your plan and fighting you at confirmation, let's change it now.
The initial plan said the HHSC could not collect fines or fees from the Children's Hospital. The fees would be for Children's incorrectly reporting to the government that it paid $27 million of rent to UMC when it really didn't. Children's got reimbursed money from the government for reporting that. So HHSC said it still needs the option to fine Children's for possibly receiving money it was not entitled to.
What they said was, look, you can't tie our hands that way in language that way. Okay. You can't state in a plan that we won't do something and that we're not going to do essentially our duty.
The silver lining for UMC?
Have HHSC work with the reorganized debtor to make it not a financial burden that will inhibit their ability to grow or succeed.
All right, and joining us now are County Judge Veronica Escobar and UMC Board Chair Steve Degroat. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Of course. So there's still a chance UMC will have to pay millions of dollars to the state on behalf of Children's, depending on what the state finds, right?
Right. So here's the status of that. The state is doing an audit. There's actually two audits. Mm-hmm. There's a desk audit, and then there's a deeper audit into the Medicaid issue, which you described. That is not done, so we don't know what the total amount will be or could be. What is certain, though, and what is really good news for our community is that HHSC has been working very well with the UMC lawyers, with Senator Jose Rodriguez's office, and what we believe very firmly is that HHSC does not want to harm the reorganized debtor, which is the
So in other
new...
words, they don't want to charge you what you cannot afford at the moment.
Right, right. And, you know, all of those discussions are still ongoing, and so nothing is finalized, but all indications are very positive.
You know, despite that, Judge, I mean, UMC is still going to have to put up some cash for this. I mean, they're not going to, if they find that Children's received money that it was not entitled to, and there's indications that it did, UMC is going to have to pay some money. So, from an outsider's perspective, okay, who doesn't know all the nuanced legal back and forth between the two parties, It looks like this deal is really good for Children's, but UMC and taxpayers got the short end of the stick. And let me tell you why. So UMC is going to have to pay, some money to the state for this. It's only getting back $15 million of the $106 million that UMC said Children's owed it. And then it's giving Children's $7 million to pay back everyone else in full except UMC. And we don't know what this will mean for taxpayers in the future.
So a lot of questions in there. Let me try to get to each one, and if I don't get to one, please let me know that I've skipped over something. So what viewers and taxpayers should know first and foremost is that the alternative might have been closure. If Children's were to shut its doors and were to require a new provider number in order to open its doors again, that would have been cost prohibitive. So in other words, if Children's ran out of cash at the end of the year, or if we don't have a joint plan that essentially satisfies the debtors and is able to be confirmed because it's a plan that is consensual, then the chances were very high of Children's closing. If the Children's Hospital were to close its doors, not only would we lose the 400 jobs, not only would we lose the 45 residencies, all the physicians, all the specialists and subspecialists, and the tremendous care that it delivers to this community, but UMC would never, the guarantee is UMC would never have been paid back. So then the chances would be zero for the taxpayer ever getting paid back for the portion of the debt, both the secured and the unsecured debt. So the other thing that your viewers should know is that according to the pro formas, and those are all public and available, after this first year, next fiscal year, Children's should break even. And after that, hopefully, with some really great leadership, with some wise decision making as opposed to some of what we saw in the past, we really believe that Children's can be successful.
Okay, but if I'm watching from home, I'm thinking, I heard something similar in 2007. I heard that this Children's Hospital was going to be profitable, or at least break even early on. So there are people watching out there who are very skeptical of what you're saying.
I don't blame them one bit. Unfortunately, we didn't have control over governance over the independent Children's Hospital. The difference with this plan is that there will be greater accountability for UMC and the taxpayer going forward. You have covered, and other reporters have covered, how governance really was a significant issue in Children's ability to be successful. You all covered that they walked away from over $20 million in Medicaid supplemental dollars. You all covered some of the you had a report where you showed that according to the feasibility study, they actually exceeded some expectations, but their expenditures exceeded their revenues. And so unlike any other business, instead of reducing the revenues to meet instead of reducing the expenditures to meet the revenues, they did the opposite. And so absolutely, should people be concerned going forward? They should. And so we're trying to make all of this as transparent as possible so that people can stay in the loop. Talking to every media outlet almost every day, it feels like, doing shows like this. Every document is available for public review. It's going to come down to really good governance and good business decision making.
And I want to talk to you about that. Judge, Mr. Degroat, I've interviewed both of you before on the governance issues, and early on, I asked you, Judge, it looks like they grew too much too fast, like they were spending too much money really early on. Mr. Degroat, I know I've spoken to you about that before, and according to the audits that we were able to see from Children's, it looks like that was the case. So the challenge going forward, and I know this is a very delicate discussion because the confirmation hearing is still pending, and you are restoring a very contentious relationship with Children's Hospital, but there's going to have to be some changes at Children's, it looks like, in the way it spends money, and that's going to be difficult.
Well, when the hospital was conceived, it was conceived based on lots of organizational shared expenses. And as the hospital opened, in 2012, they immediately got away from that. So instead of having their revenue cycle, which is the billing and collections, supported by UMC, they went out and got a private vendor. Lots of things like that happened where they actually duplicated expenses instead of tried to realize sharing expenses with UMC. So we've got to go back to that original concept so that we minimize the duplication of expenses. We control those expenses. So yes, they did grow rapidly. They had unconstrained expense control. Their revenue projections were pretty much on the mark, but their expenses were excessive compared to the revenue stream that they created. So we have to make everything work right. We have to make sure that we do control expenses, that we create these savings, that we try to push the volume a little bit in terms of having more El Paso and area children served at the Children's Hospital.
Mm-hmm. And I just, because I'm sure that there are doctors watching your show, the shared services that Mr. Degroat is talking about are administrative. Because one of the fears from the physicians, and we absolutely want to allay those fears, is that there will be a sharing of adult and pediatric services. That's not what Steve's talking about. It's about those administrative services and those functions that help reduce the overhead of the hospital.
Speaking of physicians, there have been whispers that the salaries at Children's are above market value, that they're too high, and that that's part of the expenditures that may have led to the situation right now.
Those will all be studied as we get into the management of the Children's Hospital after the confirmation. So I couldn't say today they are or are not above or below market, but we will dive into that. We will make sure that we pay competitive compensation for all positions. We have a great partnership with Texas Tech in providing a lot of the specialists. So we're going to look at all of that, and everybody's going to chip in, and we're going to make this work. Remember that our end goal was to have a freestanding, separately licensed children's hospital, not for profit, associated with an academic facility, and not make it an additional burden for El Paso County taxpayers.
Mm-hmm. And for the sake of children in El Paso, I'm a mom. I know that if my son, heaven forbid, was desperately ill, I know that I would want to take him to a pediatric subspecialist. And I think most parents in El Paso agree that they want a children's hospital here. I think this community wants that and wanted to keep that mission. And you certainly don't want to be punitive, but at some point you have to weigh the mission of the Children's Hospital with the interest of the taxpayers of this community. And I've heard from some people who say that they believe the taxpayers were sort of held hostage, like you can't risk closing this children's hospital, so UMC or the county may have agreed to too much in the deal.
And I've heard that too. Although to be fair, I have received, as I'm sure Steve has, a lot of great positive feedback, because I think your statement is correct. I think the vast majority of folks don't want to lose 400 jobs from one day to the next, don't want the economy to be impacted negatively that way, and certainly don't want to lose the access to care that is so critical in a community that has access to care issues. And you're right, we have to balance the needs of the taxpayer. If UMC had pulled the plug early on, and believe me, I know that there were board members on the UMC board who wanted to kill the contracts almost immediately, that would have meant absolute shutdown. That would have shut the doors to the hospital. You have to weigh the sort of the long-term issues versus the short-term issues. So in the short term, UMC was carrying the financial burden for the services that Children's wasn't repaying. UMC was covering those costs, and it helped deplete some of its fund balance as a result. But you never heard UMC or the Commissioner's Court say, we need to raise taxes to cover this bill. Not once. Not even this year, the very same year that there's groundbreaking at 2 clinics, and additionally the year that Children's will be a subsidiary.
Some people are seeing tax relief from the county this next fiscal year.
Exactly. In fact, that's precisely right. Because we went below the effective tax rate, some property values decreased. That's why the effective tax rate was the way that it was. So some people will see tax relief. But if we had shut those doors, Maria, the chances of recovering a single dime would have completely evaporated. So you have to be in it for the long haul. I do firmly believe that UMC will be repaid the amount of money that is in the unsecured and secured debt, and the money that is the other half is the unpaid rent. That is money that UMC was not out cash. Right. It's a debt, and Children's owed it, but it wasn't like cash out.
Yeah, it's not like it paid it or it took it.
Right.
Okay.
And the alternative would have been not having any of it paid back and an empty hospital.
Okay, we're going to have to take a commercial break. When we come back, we're going to go to the phone lines with Enrique in the Lower Valley. And I'm going to ask you about some of the contentions that Andy Krafser, former bankruptcy trustee, has said, questioning some of the legality of this deal. So we're going to clear that up when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching ABC-7 Extra. Remember, you can call us at 915-496-1775. Email us at ABC7Extra@KVIA.com, or you can tweet me. Probably the best way is to tweet me at Maria G. ABC7. We'll be right back. Welcome back to ABC7 Extra. We're talking about the deal between the Children's Hospital and University Medical Center. Joining us is County Judge Veronica Escobar and UMC Board Chair Steve Degroat. Thanks again for being here. I want to ask you about some of the concerns. Andy Krafser, very strong voice in this whole process. He's been really outspoken. Former bankruptcy trustee and attorney who it appears will object to the plan, it seems like it. He has said that the Texas Constitution essentially prohibits a county from lending money or becoming a stockholder in a corporation, meaning this plan between Children's and UMC, he says, pretty much appears to be illegal.
He's wrong. And first, I do want to say that Steve and I and board members and members of the court know Andy Krafser, have tremendous respect for him, and he has absolutely every right to voice his opinion. He has absolutely every right to object to the plan if he wants to, and if the bankruptcy court indulges him, that's his right. We don't agree with him, and here's why. And I have to remind viewers, UMC has its own bankruptcy lawyer, the county has its own bankruptcy lawyer, we also have the county attorneys. We have a lot of lawyers looking at all of this, and who have been looking at all of this every step of the way. UMC never lent money it never said, look, all these services that you can't pay us for, let's consider it a loan. That was never stated. There was never a vote to have those unpaid services considered a loan. Those unpaid services, in fact, the debt for that is what's been at the center of all these arguments. We've been fighting over the debt, fighting over the repayment of the debt. And there were 2 forbearance notices signed by Children's acknowledging that the debt existed. Now, as to the part of the debt that's not in the plan, it's actually not been forgiven. That word is nowhere in the plan, because governments cannot forgive a debt. But what governments do every single day of the week is go into settlement agreements with people who owe them money. UMC writes off bad debt every single day of the week, every day of the year. All hospital districts do. All private hospitals do it. When people can't pay their bills, you negotiate, you get what you can, and some of it you're not going to collect. So part of this was, first of all, I think Andy mischaracterizes it as a loan, and so that's one part of his argument. The other part of his argument is that UMC cannot run a nonprofit corporation, or it can't be a subsidiary. That's false as well. That's actually in the code. I asked the county attorney's office for the actual language, and I got it. Most major hospital districts in Texas do the same thing. They have subsidiaries, whether they be clinics, whether they be another hospital, whether they be like El Paso First for UMC, an HMO. They appoint board members. The final contention that Andy has made recently, and it's actually a contention that comes from another lawyer, a lawyer who is well-versed in local government law, who shall remain unnamed because he doesn't want to be named, who said that he's concerned that nowhere in the Constitution do commissioners' court members have the right to veto or appoint members to a subsidiary. We don't agree, the lawyers don't necessarily agree, but that is being vetted all over again with outside experts. And if that's the case, it'll just be removed from the plan. That's a simple fix.
But I think also at the heart of Crafter's argument is that the county and UMC must have sufficient controls to protect the taxpayer's investment. And he says that at this point, it does not appear that UMC has sufficient controls to protect investment, the public's investment in El Paso Children's.
UMC will have 4 seats out of 7 on the board. That's a majority.
Okay. All right. Let's go to Enrique in the Lower Valley. Enrique, what's your comment or your question?
The voters wanted a hospital, so let the taxpayers pay it off. We got $1.5 billion, just a third of our school districts and community college won. So let's get over it and get it on with it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Enrique saying the voters wanted the children's hospital. We have a lot of debt with just the independent school district, so let's get over this problem and onto the...
And our goal is Enrique's goal. Let's make this a highly functioning, highly successful company that will continue to grow, offer great services, and pay back its debt.
Okay, let's go to Joe on the east side. Joe, what's your comment or your question?
It just seems like the Sun Bowl is paying $1, if I'm not mistaken, for every year as a lease to the city. Why isn't UMC considering a deal like that with Children's Hospital? It really, UMC is a county hospital, I know, it makes profits and all these things, and it is already providing resources, it is already providing financial relief. Why is it being, it just really seems greedy. And from the get-go, that amount of rent on county land, on voting initiatives, it just really seems, and they're overcharged. I mean, it just really seems very greedy for UMC to, I mean, they're already, yes, Children's is making a lot of mistakes, but to add insult to injury, it just seems like you got them where you want them, and they were never meant to be successful based on the greediness. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Again, the rent issue, which has been something that's come up over and over again. Do you want to address that?
Well, I have a great answer because I'm very active in the Sun Bowl, and the issue is, yes, the Sun Bowl gets access to the Sun Bowl Association gets access to the Sun Bowl at UTEP, which it originally owned and transferred back to UTEP. But the Sun Bowl also pays additional funds, which in essence represents maintenance and repairs and improvements in the Sun Bowl every year. And it's a pretty significant amount of money. So just like the Children's Hospital, they pay additional monies. They don't get free rent. They have to pay their way to try to keep the Sun Bowl up to standards. They've made significant improvements, and there's still significant improvements that need to be made.
So they pay for depreciation?
Absolutely.
Okay. More than $1, obviously.
Well, they pay for maintenance, repairs, and improvements to keep the Sun Bowl up to standards.
And what the caller should know is that in the renegotiation, the rent was reduced. It's still $500,000 a month, but as a taxpayer, what we told taxpayers was they would pay to build the brick and mortar, they would not pay for the upkeep. And so the depreciation goes toward the upkeep. If the voters had wanted to also pay for the upkeep, that would have meant issuing of certificates of obligation in the future. That was not something that we felt was appropriate for the taxpayer to pay.
Mm-hmm. Now, we've talked about how UMC pays rent to itself to pay for depreciation, but it pays a lot less than what Children's was paying to UMC.
You mean UMC? You mean Children's as the renegotiated debtor?
No. UMC pays rent to itself.
Well,
for
it lists depreciation on when it works on its budget. In the UMC budget is depreciation, and it essentially resides, I think, in its fund balance, because that's where UMC draws that cash down. So if you all have gone into UMC recently, you will have seen lots of improvements to the physical structure. Some of that has come from certificates of obligation, but a lot of that has also come from the depreciation, which was cash in its fund balance. Okay. And the difference is UMC as a taxing entity can access bond dollars. Children's as a nonprofit can't access that same kind of loan or funding through
okay.
Bonds.
This is a tweet from Cesar saying, is anyone going to be criminally charged for reporting rent that was paid to UMC when it was never paid? Isn't this fraud? And of course, that is referring to the almost $30 million that Children said it paid in rent to UMC when it really didn't, and then thus received state money because of that.
I don't think Steve or I can respond to that. That's something far outside of our hands. You know, the various players in this know what happened, from the AG to the federal bankruptcy judge, in addition to UMC having reported the issue early on. And so it's not in the hands of UMC or the county.
Okay, we're going to have to take a break. When we come back, more of your phone calls and your emails and tweets. Stay with us. Welcome back to ABC-7 Extra. Let's get to your emails now. This is from Mr. Reyes. He says, how can the county judge think she can conduct her dealings regarding El Paso Children's Hospital behind closed doors and then arrogantly give interviews telling the media how the people of El Paso feel without consulting the public? As far as this segment of the public is concerned, Escobar is out of touch with the public, and El Paso is in need of a better representative. How do you respond to that, Judge?
Well, I mean, you know, El Pasoans have an opportunity to elect their representatives every 4 years, and so he'll definitely have his opportunity. He has had 3 other opportunities before this. But that aside, here's what I have heard from the public. They want UMC to be paid back. We do too. And we believe the best way to do that is by keeping the doors open and having a successful company that can afford to do that. Number 2, I have heard from people that they don't want to see 400 jobs leave this community from one day to the next. And I have heard from innumerable family members who've used El Paso Children's who are incredibly grateful for the clinical care that it provides. We absolutely could have gone down another route. We could have allowed the doors to close, and we could have said we tried and walked away from it. But there is far too much at stake for our future. This community really desperately needs access to health care. This hospital provides excellent health care to our kids. This community also desperately needs those jobs. Those jobs are part of an important economic engine that is health care. And finally, we want to see the debt repaid, and this was our best shot at it.
Mm-hmm. Some of the bankruptcy lawyers for Children's will be getting paid $1.1 million for about 4 months' worth of work, not including the $400,000 they were paid just before the bankruptcy. Will UMC somehow get stuck with part of this bill?
I think UMC is going to challenge the legal fees.
Yeah, we'll go through a process of challenging the legal fees, so that will be a determination made by Judge Mott in terms of what is fair and reasonable.
And should we expect a resolution with that after the confirmation hearing in December, or?
You know, that's a good question. I don't know the timeline for that. I know that in terms of a timeline, November 30th is the deadline for objections, and so if Mr. Crafter objects, we'll know before then. December 8th is the date of the confirmation hearing here in El Paso at 11. And there's still a lot of post-bankruptcy hearings and details that have to be worked out, so it may be after the confirmation, but I'm not certain about that.
Okay. All right, we're out of time. Thank you so much for joining us. Judge, thank you.
Thank
You're
you.
always so accessible.
Oh,
I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
You've
Thank you,
never
Maria.
denied me an interview, Steve. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And thank you for joining us here on ABC 7 Extra. We really hope you found this informative, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.